All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thanks so much for being here with me today. I'm your host, Nolan. We got lots to get into today, lots of updates out of this war in the Middle East that continues to escalate. America and Israel launched more strikes on Iran today, and the footage out of Tehran looks utterly apocalyptic, so we're going to react to some of the latest militarily in terms of the news in the Middle East. We also had America sinking an Iranian warship in the middle of international waters, which was unbelievable. It's the first time they've sunk a warship since World War II. So we'll show you guys some of that footage and we'll talk about that. And then later on in the show, we're going to discuss the possibility of insurgency forces moving into Iran. We have reports about the CIA potentially funding and backing and arming the Kurds in Iran to try and create some sort of insurgency or civil war in the country to try and overthrow the regime. So we'll talk about all this today and more on the Quest for Clarity podcast.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.
Maybe we should improve the liberty of our own country before we seek to do so abroad. Some of us have paid attention to the fact that the expert class, including the foreign policy experts, lie all the time. The correct answer to this, of course, as it always is liberty. All right, everybody, before we begin, if you wouldn't mind going right down below this video and hitting like and subscribe, I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you wouldn't mind going to my Instagram, X, and Spotify and giving all those a follow, I'd really appreciate that as well. Let's get into the news here. We're going to start off by reading the Wall Street Journal's latest on all of this. There's lots of updates really by the minute. The Wall Street Journal is saying that Trump is, quote, actively considering the United States' role in Iran after the conflict ends. Very broad statement there. Who knows what he means by that? The role in Iran, does that mean the United States will be in Iran, like boots on the ground? We've heard this floated repeatedly. We've had Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump both refuse to rule out boots on the ground. We had some of the members of the Senate yesterday get briefed by the Pentagon officials, by Rubio, the Secretary of State, by Hegseth. We had briefings in the Senate yesterday where the senators came out afterwards. We had Richard Blumenthal, who, just take it with a grain of salt, whatever he's saying, but he was saying he is very concerned about the possibility of boots on the ground after this hearing. So, and that follows with what Trump has been saying. Trump said he doesn't have the, quote, yips about boots on the ground like other presidents do, which is, one, concerning to hear, and two, other presidents have yips about boots on the ground. What are we the previous presidents were Obama, George Bush. I assure you there was no yips about boots on the ground with these presidents. But anyways, here is what the Wall Street Journal has to say about the latest here. This is all the updates from today. It says, quote, President Trump is discussing with his advisors what the U.S. role in Iran will be after the military conflict ends, the White House said. Trump said the campaign is going, quote, very well. Earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the United States can carry out its air campaign for as long as it wishes. He talked up America's successes, saying an American submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean. Quote, 4 days in, we have only just begun to fight, he said. The conflict in the Middle East continues to escalate, with Iran targeting sites across the region and Israel shooting down a jet fighter over Tehran. Here are some bullets that the Wall Street Journal gives of the latest updates. It says, quote, the White House said that Spain will cooperate with the United States military, but Spanish officials denied that the country's position had changed. Trump also plans to attend a dignified transfer of 6 Americans killed in Kuwait. That's referring to the fact that Spain did not let U.S. military personnel work out of Spain for this operation. They wanted nothing to do with this. For that, Trump threatened to cut off all trade to Spain in response to that. The next bullet point is, quote, Iran postponed plans to present the body of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei for public viewing. A missile from Iran headed for southern Turkey was intercepted by NATO defenses, the Turkish government said. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Iran has fired more than 500 ballistic missiles and over 2,000 drones over the course of the recent operation. The State Department is lining up flights for citizens leaving the Mideast, and that thousands have already left. Trump said on Truth Social that flights will be free of charge. And then the final one here, as Iran fires on its Persian Gulf neighbors, it's also signaling through diplomacy that it wants to get along with them. I'll show you guys some of the footage now from the attacks today on Tehran, and of course across the rest of Iran as well, not just Tehran, but the footage out of Tehran has gone super viral because it looks utterly apocalyptic. I'm just going to be completely honest. America and Israel both launched strikes today, another round of strikes on the capital of Iran. Reports from human rights groups are reporting that there's been roughly 1,000 civilians killed in these strikes so far. So we'll get into this and how that's obviously concerning in a second for what the prospects of peace in the region are. But here is just some of the footage that's gone viral today of the skyline of Tehran just completely filled with smoke. Take a look. So obviously it doesn't look like we're liberating the people of Iran yet. We're obviously engaged in what is mass murder of the people of Iran at this point. The mission, again, as I've made clear here during this coverage of the war, the mission was never to actually liberate the people of Iran. That's a false pretext that they sell to the American people for every war that they want to engage in. We just saw it literally a month ago with Venezuela. The pretext for what we wanted to do in Venezuela, one of them at least, was that we wanted to free the Venezuelan people from their corrupt socialist/communist regime, the Maduro regime, the Chavista regime, and install some sort of democracy in Venezuela. This is heavily pushed in the media when featuring Venezuelan diaspora figures in the media who are advocating on behalf of the country that they come from and are advocating that the United States military intervene in their country of origin to install some sort of Jeffersonian republic in place of this dictatorial regime that's currently in place. Of course, that didn't happen. We still have the same regime in Venezuela that we did. I mean, we see, this is how ridiculous it is. In the direct aftermath of the Venezuela operation where they captured Nicolas Maduro and bombed Caracas, we saw figures like Dinesh D'Souza, one of the most prominent advocates of war. We saw figures like that, like these figures that are supposedly have some credibility among the conservative base, among the conservative movement in the Republican Party. These figures instantly come out and are posting AI-generated pictures of Venezuelans crying and cheering in the streets and saying, "Thank you, President Trump, for freeing the people of Venezuela," and then doesn't even care to correct the record as we are now 2 months after that operation, and the exact same regime is still in place in Venezuela. We just take it as a given, as if we're supposed to expect that plucking the leader of a country out is going to free the people or something. And we don't even acknowledge that the regime is still entirely intact. And since the regime is entirely intact, it proves the point that it was never about that. That's just a false pretext that they're trying to sell you. They're trying to sell you that this mission in Iran now is to free the people of Iran. It's to liberate the people of Iran from their tyrannical government. Now, the government of Iran is incredibly tyrannical. Obviously, it's a theocracy run by essentially a dictator, or at least was by Khomeini. Essentially a dictator, a religious dictator in Iran. And we're supposed to believe, because the U.S. government is telling us this, that our point for going to war here, and the point we almost went to war for back in January, was that these protesters were getting killed in the streets by the tens of thousands, allegedly, according to CBS News and Barry Weiss, and we were going to intervene on their behalf. Now, obviously, if anyone's been paying attention to foreign policy for longer than 2 seconds would know that's not true, and America, and more specifically Israel, have had an interest in toppling the Iranian regime that goes back roughly 40 years, since the 1990s and the rise of the Likud party in Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu. We all know, everyone who's been paying attention and knows about the background here, we all know that this interest in Iran and overthrowing the regime predates any of these modern protests that occurred in 2026. We all know that. And we've repeatedly also seen, again, the people who've been paying attention, there's been this repeat effort in the Middle East to co-opt demonstrations by these populations and use it as a justification to get involved in a regime change war that we wanted already for other reasons, other more nefarious reasons, like expanding Israel's borders without any pushback from the other powers of the region. We all know that that's the real pretext, and it has nothing to do with actually liberating the people of these countries. And one foolproof way to understand that is when you realize that there's no way America would want democracies in the Middle East, because the people of the Middle East don't like America very much. So in what world would the government of the United States want to install a democracy in the Middle East, a region where people are not very friendly? The people of these countries, not the governments that have been bought off, but the people of these countries don't very much like the United States. So just think about it for 2 seconds. It makes no sense that they would want to install a democracy in these countries where public support for the United States is very low. So this, of course, makes no sense. And we'll get into more of this in a second, but I do just want to make sure I show you guys this before I forget. This was a video from international waters today that was released by Pete Hegseth today at his press conference, where the United States sunk an Iranian warship in the middle, off the coast of Sri Lanka in international waters. And this is I shouldn't say it's unprecedented, but it's very crazy to watch because this is the first time the U.S. has sank or torpedoed a warship since World War II. Take a look. Now, as I already said, the objective here was not liberating the people of Venezuela. Of course, so we can throw that out the window. That's obviously not the objective. And anyone who knows anything knows that, okay? We've seen this time and time again. We're told the objective of wars is to liberate the populations. That's ridiculous. So what were the real objectives of this war? We've heard them attempted to be articulated. We've heard the president and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, and I'll show you a clip here in a second, Mike Johnson trying to articulate the points and go down the bulleted list of why we're doing this, what the point is, what's in this for the people of our country.
Iran has attacked 3 of our U.S. embassies in the last couple of days. Okay, those are sovereign territories of the U.S. They have declared war on us. I don't believe in the semantics. We've talked about the language this morning. We're not at war right now. We're 4 days in to a very specific, clear mission, an Operation Epic Fury, which has 2 components, as you know, that we have articulated over and over. The president has, the Commander of the Joint Chiefs, everybody has explained.
We've heard them try. Some of the reasons that have been floated out are incoherent, like the nuclear threat, the threat in quotation marks, from Iran, the country that did not have a nuclear program that was that was going for a nuclear weapon. And that's not that's not me saying this. That's Tulsi Gabbard just last March saying this in her annual threat assessment. So they did not have a program that was going for a nuclear weapon. We've made a deal with them before. So, and back last June in the 12-day war, we obliterated, as Trump says, repeatedly. We obliterated their nuclear stock. We obliterated their nuclear facilities, Natanz, Fordo, Isfahan. Those were destroyed. And according to satellite imagery and according to all the intelligence assessments that were reported in Israeli media in the Jerusalem Post, the Iranians had made no progress on rebuilding their nuclear facilities. They barely touched them since they were destroyed last June. So this nuclear you've seen in the last couple of days, they've really forgotten this nuclear pretense because it's ridiculous. And Ted Cruz himself went on Face the Nation on Sunday and said he had no intelligence that suggested they were anywhere close to a nuclear weapon. Because of course not, because we all know that. So they've really forgotten that when they left that excuse behind. And some of the other objectives here have been thrown out there are to stop them from acquiring intercontinental ballistic missiles. And this is kind of the imminent threat that they're floating out there. Tom Cotton says that there's an imminent threat from Iran because they're developing intercontinental ballistic missiles, completely leaving out the fact that all available intelligence suggests that it would take them 8 to 10, possibly more years to develop the technology to have a ballistic missile that can travel to the United States, an intercontinental ballistic missile that could travel to Western Europe or the United States. So that gets rid of the imminence of this threat, obviously, if we have a decade to debate this and discuss this and try and make a deal. And Of course, that gets rid of this whole justification for completely skipping the congressional authorization of any of these actions, obviously. So that's one of the justifications that they've given, which is, again, ridiculous according to all the available intelligence. Now, we've heard, according to Trump and Netanyahu, that this is a regime change war, that the end goal here is to see the regime crumble. The IRGC, they want them to lose power. Pete Hegseth came out on Monday and gave a press conference, his first statement since they launched the war, and said this wasn't a regime change war, but the regime did change. And we addressed this on the show on Monday. That's incoherent. It's not a regime change war, even though the president and Netanyahu both said it is. And the Israelis, everyone go read Israeli media, go read the interviews that they've done with the Israeli top leaders, the IDF commanders. They're all under the impression that this is a full-blown regime change war. Okay, that's what Israel's mindset is. Israel, who, according to Marco Rubio, was going to launch with or without us and basically dragged us into this war. That's what their mindset is. They're all under the impression that this is they've waited 40 years for this, as Netanyahu said, and this is the moment to overthrow the regime. Okay, that's what they're all thinking. But Pete Hegseth says that this isn't really a regime change war, but the regime did change. This is the Secretary of War saying that the regime did change. The IRGC is still in power. Okay, that's not true. So I don't know. His statement was so utterly incoherent, it was almost not even worth addressing. So it seems that the two things they've settled on for justifications for this war are ballistic missiles and the regime change effort, kind of broad regime change effort. Ballistic missiles is, as we've seen the last couple of days, Iran has been firing their ballistic missiles basically everywhere because they are under the impression as well this is a regime change war. I believe the estimate was 49 of their top people, including the Ayatollah, have been taken out in these strikes from Israel and America. And they are obviously, that gives the impression that this is a regime change war. This is an existential war for the Iranians. So they are treating this like this is their last chance to survive, and they're just firing at everybody. We've seen bombs land in Kuwait. We've seen bombs land in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman. We've seen them fly everywhere. And American bases. We saw, just yesterday, the base in Riyadh and the CIA office in Riyadh were hit. Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. They were hit yesterday by Iranian missiles. We've seen the bases in Iraq get hit. We've seen these embassies in Iraq completely under siege from pro-Iran riot crowds of pro-Iran civilians. Or I should say citizens that are engaged in riots here. So this is the situation now. It's an all-out war of survival for the Iranians. That's their perspective. Yet we're kind of stuck in limbo here in the United States. We have some people in our government saying that it is a regime change war and that the end goal of this operation is to overthrow the regime. And then we have some people saying, well, it's not really a regime change war. We'd like somebody from the same government, the IRGC, this is what Trump said, to rise up and create some sort of democratic process. Now, what he forgets there, he thinks this is going to be some Venezuela situation where Delcy Rodriguez type figure is going to rise up here. And again, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president under Maduro, is going to rise up and take power. And instead of like Delcy Rodriguez, where we kept the socialist government in place, he's hoping that some IRGC figure is going to rise up and create some sort of democratic system or something. This is what he's actually saying. Forgetting the fact, he's completely ignoring the fact the Ayatollah not only was the head of state in Iran, but was also one of the big religious figures for the Shias in Iran. All of these people in the government were extensively vetted for their positions and really just basically tested for religious loyalty to the Ayatollah. So there is a very significant chance, and this has been reported the last couple of days from CIA assessments, there is a very significant chance that whatever rises up in Iran is going to be even more hardline and radical than the Ayatollah was. This is always what happens, by the way. When we overthrew Bashar al-Assad in Syria, what did we get in its place? After a decade-long civil war between America-backed Al-Qaeda and ISIS and al-Nusra Front fighters, we got al-Jolani, now known as al-Shara, in charge of Syria, who is the former emir of Al-Qaeda. And ask the Christians of Syria. It's not going very well in Syria right now. So that's what replaced the secular Ba'athist government of Syria. We got this radical Al-Qaeda emir in his place. What happened in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was replaced? It's now essentially an Iranian proxy state run by an Ayatollah who is similarly as radical in his religious convictions. This is what we see. And of course, there is the other alternative that this turns into Libya 2.0, where when we overthrew Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, we see essentially the state collapse into utter civil war and open-air slave markets in the country. And essentially, it's a never-ending civil war it's been a decade plus now. So these are the possibilities. And I'd say the least likely one is that, by far the least likely one, is that we see some Jefferson-type figure lead a 1776 revolution for democracy and independence in Iran. And the idea that we don't see this, that the government officials that are running this operation don't see that, is startling. I don't understand what their plan is here. They've repeatedly said that they don't have a plan because they don't need to have a plan. We're not running by the conventional wisdom that you need to have a plan for what comes next. Okay, then you're just admitting the end goal of this chaos here. As Israel admits, at least you're being as honest as the Israelis in all of this. The Israelis repeatedly, Netanyahu says he wants chaos. He wants Libya 2.0. So we have no idea in this government what's going to happen next. And they don't seem to care about what the potential objectives here should be. They're just saying kind of a broad regime change operation, but not a regime change operation. So it's unbelievably unclear and incoherent. And the other excuse, or the other justification, I should say, for why we're doing this is the ballistic missiles. Now, Iran has launched hundreds so far at all these countries around the region, and they don't probably have too much longer to go. But the problem is that the facilities that make the ballistic missiles by the hundreds every single month, these IRGC-run facilities that build their arsenal of ballistic missiles that can touch Israel and all the Gulf allies and Jordan and Iraq, they are deep underground. They are thousands of feet underground. And short of ground operations, it's very unlikely that all of them would be obliterated. Now, I'm not the military expert, so I don't know what they're necessarily capable of doing from air and from sea. But I've listened to some military people say that it doesn't seem very likely that we're going to destroy their entire ballistic missile capability, which is what, again, many people have stated as the goal. Destroy ballistic missiles that can touch Israel, which is like their entire arsenal. It doesn't seem very likely outside of full-on, boots-on-the-ground U.S. invasion of Iran. And this is what Trump has been unwilling to rule out, and so is Pete Hegseth. So this brings me to what we heard yesterday. Just yesterday, if we're gonna need some sort of ground operation here, what are the potential options? Well, CNN reported yesterday, we'll read from this real quick. It says, quote, CIA working to arm Kurdish forces to spark uprising in Iran, sources say. So, for those who don't know, the Kurds are an ethnic group in the Middle East. Their region spans across multiple countries, Iraq, Iran, Syria. They are one of the biggest ethnic groups, if not the biggest, in the world that doesn't have a country. And they span across borders in, again, Iran, Iraq, Syria, across the region. And the United States and Israel have been allied with the Kurds for decades at this point, and we have used them basically as insurgency groups in Iraq and in Syria in the efforts to overthrow the regimes when we were doing these regime change operations over the last couple decades. So we've been allied with the Kurds for quite a while now, and it seems, and reports suggest, that Trump and Netanyahu were on a phone call with the leaders within Iraqi Kurdistan just the last couple days and over the past couple weeks, potentially tossing out ideas as to potentially having an insurgency in Iran and sparking civil conflict. Now, let's just read from this CNN article about this. It says, quote, the CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of fomenting a popular uprising in Iran. Multiple people familiar with the plan told CNN. The Trump administration has been in active discussions with Iranian opposition groups and Kurdish leaders in Iraq to provide them with military support, the sources said. Iranian Kurdish armed groups have thousands of forces operating along the Iraq-Iran border, primarily in Iraq's Kurdistan region. Several of the groups have released public statements since the beginning of the war, hinting at imminent action and urging Iranian military forces to defect. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has been striking Kurdish groups and said on Tuesday that it's targeting Kurdish forces with dozens of drones. The CIA support for Iranian Kurdish groups began several months before the war, one of the sources and senior Kurdistan regional government officials said. So, according to the sources reporting to CNN, America has been backing, by America we mean the CIA, the government, has been backing the Kurds in Iranian Kurdistan and Iraqi Kurdistan for months. Now, I want you to recall real quick what we talked about a month ago, back in January, during the protests in Iran. These massive protests, the civilian population protesting the government in Iran. What did we see? We saw, reported in multiple different outlets, we saw witness accounts of people dressed in all black, carrying guns, weapons that they seemingly smuggled in, reportedly through Iraqi Kurdistan into Iranian Kurdistan, dressed in all black, taking over government buildings in a professional, organized manner. And reports suggest that they may have been backed by the National Endowment for Democracy, which it's basically the regime change wing of the government, of America's government, that funds these rebel groups in a bunch of these countries. In any country we want to overthrow, DC decides they want to overthrow the government of, they'll back, through the National Endowment for Democracy, rebel factions and dissident groups in these countries. And that seems to have been the case during the January protests in Iran. Now, this would obviously suggest that this has been in the work for a while, and this could potentially be, as I mentioned before, if we need a ground troop operation here to overthrow the regime, to destroy all their ballistic missile manufacturing facilities, could this be that? Now, the Kurds in Iran make up about 10% of the population of the country, so who knows if that's enough to actually on their own overthrow the government with, of course it wouldn't be on their own, it would be with backing from U.S. Special Forces, from the CIA, from Mossad most likely. So who knows if that alone will overthrow the government, but this suggests that the U.S. isn't going to leave here, this operation, without at least significantly weakening and destabilizing the regime. So we've heard again, as I said before, we've heard it repeatedly that this is a regime change operation, that it's not a regime change operation. This would suggest that this is a regime change operation. This is the exact same type of thing that happened with Operation Timber Sycamore in Syria with Barack Obama, when we funded and armed and trained Al-Qaeda and ISIS to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. This is the exact same type of thing. This is what we see repeatedly. We fund insurgency rebel groups to create civil wars in these countries. And this, just to further prove the point that the goal here is not some liberal democracy, obviously, and it really is to create some sort of chaos. What has Israel been doing? Have we kept up with what Israel has been doing the past couple days in their bombing campaigns? They haven't only been bombing military and political assets, they've been bombing the police stations in these different regions of the country. These are intentional efforts to create destabilization in this country and try and foment some sort of popular uprising of the Iranian people. Again, whatever that even means, because we all know the Iranian people is about 92 million people of all different backgrounds. So who knows what the actual plan is here? It seems from this reporting that it might be some sort of insurgency, creating some sort of civil conflict, popular uprising in the country. Who knows? But that is the latest on all of the actual operations on the ground. Now, I want to end off here by addressing an argument that I've heard repeatedly. I've seen it on Twitter, on Instagram. I've heard this repeatedly from the people who are supporting this war, specifically the right-wingers who are supporting this war. The common argument, it's really the laziest argument, but the common argument from people who support this war against people who oppose it, specifically right-wingers who oppose war, people like myself, libertarians, conservatives who oppose this war, one of the common arguments you'll hear is that you're unpatriotic if you don't support the war. or you don't support what the military is doing right now. You're un-American. You hate America. This is literally what you hear people say. Ben Shapiro just put out an entire video accusing a bunch of people, a bunch of prominent people who are against this war, being un-American, unpatriotic, hating the country. He genuinely says that they hate the country. I just want to point out that this is the dumbest argument that you could possibly make in support of a war. This, just so you know, where this argument like originates, it goes back centuries. This goes back centuries to people who've been against wars, being accused of being un-American or unpatriotic. That goes back to the world wars. This current iteration of this, the neoconservative version of this accusation, really dates back to 2003 with David Frum. He was George Bush's speechwriter, prominent neoconservative. Funny enough, J.D. Vance's earliest mentor, but that's a whole separate issue. David Frum in 2003 wrote an article titled Unpatriotic Conservatives, where he called out all the conservative he called out Patrick Buchanan and Justin Raimondo and Lou Rockwell, all these prominent right-wing conservative libertarian thinkers and commentators and media figures who were opposed to the war in Iraq. He called them all out, called them all unpatriotic, said they hated the country. They're against America's role in the world. They hate the country. And to anyone who doesn't realize how comical that is yet, I said again, he talked about Pat Buchanan, okay? He says Pat Buchanan hates the country. Lou Rockwell and Justin Raimondo, these like legends of the right wing in America. He's accusing them of being unpatriotic and hating the country. This is the laziest form of argumentation, and we see it again today. Every war that people are against, every time there's the anti-war crowd, they get accused of being anti-American or hating the country. Let me tell you why I'm against this war, okay? I'm against this war because I love the country enough to see how destroyed it has become from endless wars, specifically in the Middle East, but other ones as well. We spent trillions of dollars on Middle East wars since 9/11. And number one, how have those wars gone exactly? Iraq is a Iranian proxy state. Syria is run by our enemies, Al-Qaeda. Libya's a failed state. Yemen has just been genocided. The war in Gaza, of course, was also a genocide. We've seen these states repeatedly collapse and devolve into utter chaos or become proxies of our enemies in the region. How has it gone at home? Can we address for 1 second how it's gone in America? Well, we're $40 trillion almost in debt after all of this. The country is more divided than ever politically amidst all of that. The infrastructure of this country is crumbling. The politics of our country, the government is more corrupt than ever. The war machine basically runs DC. All of our members of Congress are getting funded by these war racketeers. This war was completely unconstitutional, but that's another thing that has been a cost of all these wars, that the Constitution and the Congress, for all intents and purposes, has been utterly abandoned and destroyed. All processes that were set in place by the founders, utterly destroyed from all of these endless wars, all of them undeclared. And this is this argument that if you are against wars that America, our government, is engaged in, then you hate the country. Okay, if criticizing the government means that you hate the country, then every right-winger who's saying this now also hates the country. All of these people were correctly bashing Anthony Fauci and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin. All of these people, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, everyone who's saying right now that if you bash our government, then you're bashing the country. All of them are guilty of this same crime, just so we're clear. If you hated what the government did to you during COVID, does that make you un-American? If you hated what Barack Obama did in the Middle East, does that make you un-American? If you hated what Joe Biden did throughout his entire presidency, flooding the country with illegal immigrants, does that make you un-American? Because obviously not is the stupidest argument you could possibly make, and you would only make that type of argument when you have nothing left to say. But that's really the line we see being pushed by the intellectual heroes of the right wing, Ben Shapiro, all of these figures. They're saying that if you're against this, then you're against America. Ben Shapiro, this guy who claims to be some right-wing conservative, really is not an individualist at all because he's conflating the country with the government. I would urge everyone to read Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. And if you read that, then you understand that the government, the state, and the country are not the same entity at all. The state is a separate entity run by bureaucrats that you don't even know, tens of thousands of bureaucrats who you never know, who you never see the face of, who you never hear the name of, who are making decisions on behalf of you. They are going to war and launching mass murder campaigns claiming to represent you. And Ben Shapiro says that if you don't like that, then you're un-American. That is the most un-American thing you can possibly say, because America is built on the idea of individual rights, individual liberty. And Ben Shapiro, in saying this argument, in making this case, is engaged in the most collectivist garbage. And this is coming from some sort of conservative thought leader? Okay, sure. That's where we'll end it off for today. Don't let them ever bully you into supporting mass murder conducted by the state. America, the people of this country, are not committing mass murder. It's the government, it's the state doing it with your tax dollars. You're a victim here too in this. They are stealing tax dollars from you and using it to commit mass murder abroad. Okay? That's the situation here. That's where we'll end it off for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please be sure to go down below and hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a good one.
It is about who we are. It is about what we believe.
They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become.
Mr. Speaker, we're not rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic tonight. We're putting coal in the boiler and setting a course for the iceberg.